Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulullah. Today we read the very last surah that Imam al-Ghazali chose in the first section, the first part of the juz of the Quran, Jawahir al-Quran. The second section will be on the Durar, because the book is being divided into two parts. For brevity, we say the book of Jawahir al-Quran. Really, it's Jawahir al-Quran wa Durar. And so the first part are jewels, second part are pairs. Some chapters did not show up in the first part. They would show up in the second part, not every single surah. So, for example, the very last reading we had, it was Surah Al-Alaq, and there are definitely many chapters in between. In the Durar, in the next section, towards the end of the section, literally at the end of the next section, we'll have قل أعوذ برب الفلق and also قل أعوذ برب الناس. So it remains to see one might detect a certain emphasis on spirituality, but we'll see inshallah. Surah Al-Ikhlas, the surah on sincerity, that which is pure, not really no blemishes in the sense, but here we talk about theology. And this surah is these short 4 verses, very short surah indeed. A testimony to the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, pure monotheism, the essence of Islam, the cornerstone of Islam, the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes even some Muslim writers might use the word unity of God, and I find it problematic. Because unity presupposes multiple parties, at least it permits such a possibility, while oneness does not really allow such a possibility at all. Oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with no theology that permits any association with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at all. We will see how this also works with the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, being al-ahad, being as-samad. And I think if we just read and then try to comment on this very important surah, we'll decipher some of the meanings inshallah. I would say that to many of us, all of us, I hope, the meanings are known and to all Muslims, and I think also to many non-Muslims. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. A preliminary translation, which is an interpretation, say, addressing the Prophet ﷺ and addressing, of course, all of us, all of humanity at large. He is Allah, Huwa Allah. one, أحد. Allah, the sustainer, As-Samad. The sustainer is part of the meaning of As-Samad. He is the one who is needed by all and he needs none. It is only mentioned once in the Quran, in this surah, As-Samad, As-Samadiyya. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could be described as As-Samad. Sometimes other words derived from the same root, like Samad. This is about human beings being steadfast in the face of injustice. Samidun, the plural. Sumud, a word that is very popular amongst Palestinians, at least. Being steadfast in the face of the occupation. And the fourth verse, لم يلد ولم يولد, he has never had offspring. And this is the third verse, لم يلد ولم يولد, he has never had offspring nor was born. One might think of other religions where a son is attributed to God. This is why we speak about As-Samad. He is not in need. When we have children, it is a need that we have. It's an innate need that we have. We might be disturbed in the sense of a way of life that pushes away having children because of a wrong idea of freedom. So many women would skip having children, and some would suddenly pay attention. They have been convinced to lead a way of life. They call it progressive. They call it fulfilling. They call it in the sense of pursuing a degree and more degrees and a professional life, as it is called. And out of a sudden, the woman is in her 30s, maybe late 30s, and she knows that her biological clock is ticking. Marriage does not prevent you from studying. Marriage does not prevent you from being professional. Having children does not prevent you. But then when you are not married and no children, and you are getting close to the 40 years mark as a woman, you know very well that it might be already late. Might be. I knew a woman she was married, non-Muslim, professional, and she got pregnant for the first time when she was after 40. And rather than being very happy, euphoric, she had the baby because simply her biological clock was ticking. And she was lamenting the loss of her personal freedom. That's a twisted, really, worldview. It seems that we have failed to find comfort, to find love, to find in the things that we are supposed to. The family, children. Out of a sudden, this became the antithesis of freedom. So there are religions who attribute children, religions of the past. I think it's very important to mention Greek mythology in this case, because Jesus Christ, peace upon him, almost 2,000 years ago, a little bit more, he was born into a Greek milieu, Greek culture. The Mediterranean was practically a Greek sea. There were Greek colonies dotting the shores of the Mediterranean, Greece itself, Asia Minor, the eastern coast of the Mediterranean. So we talk about Lebanon, we talk about Palestine. In Egypt itself, Alexandria was frequented by even some Greek philosophers. North Africa, in Libya, they continue to call the people of Darna on the coast almost. It's a very large country with sparsely populated, and the major cities are literally on the coast. Darna, close to Tobruk in the east, in between Benghazi and Tobruk. The Libyans call the people of Darna Vreik until today because of the origins. This was a long time ago, but still. All the way to Spain, even in Italy, there were Greek, Greeks arrived even in Italy, and this is where the word Greek really came into to represent the Greeks. So, what about Greek mythology and how it is related to what we talk about, the attributing a son to God? Greek mythology, many gods, the hierarchy. The gods would marry, they would envy, they would compete for the male gods who had no problem marrying female human beings and female. We talk about the mythology, of course, don't forget this. So, and the opposite, a Greek goddess would marry a human male. This is why, just to give an example, Pythagoras, who is known for his mathematics. He was a mathematician, but also he had kind of his own religion, and he was believed to be son of God amongst the Greeks. So that was popular. It might have been a convenient way to cover up for children born out of the wedlock. Just simply claim that was a Greek god behind the scene. So Jesus Christ, as a miracle from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the word of God to Maryam alayhi salam, without a father, which is not really a problem at all, since the Quran refers people, refers the reader to the example of Adam alayhi salam, meaning that if it's hard for you to believe that God could create someone without a father, just think of Adam alayhi salam, neither father nor mother. And the similarities between both are many. Both, by the way, they spoke without acquiring the language from their social context. Adam alayhi salam was just being created and he spoke. Otherwise, you would delay the divine commandments, orders, until he learns language, and that would be impossible without a social context. And Jesus Christ spoke immediately after birth, and there was no time to acquire anything from his social surroundings. God given, think about it. The language, not only the infrastructure, not only the innate ability, the the potential, literally, they were granted the ability to speak. So it was in this, under these circumstances that Jesus Christ fulfilled his life as a prophet, as a messenger, and people were accustomed to the idea of God's having children, and many other things one can speak about. This surah, Surah Al-Ikhlas, we said that it's only we to speak about 4 verses, very short. About 15 words all in all. The very simple syllables, many of these words have one syllable. Now I'll explain why this is important. An American Muslim, in fact, I think originally she is Canadian, Professor Ingrid Mattson, a revert. She converted to Islam, and she continued her studies, and she became a distinguished scholar, the first woman president of the Islamic Society of North America. She wrote a book about the Quran, and she wrote about Surah Al-Ikhlas. And it is from her writings that I became aware of the one-syllable words in this surah. For example, Qul, that's one syllable. Huwa, that's one syllable. Okay. She said that this is very easy to understand, to memorize, to pretty much like the language itself is very easy for children, because children would begin with sounds and then one syllable at one point. I love to ask my children when they were very young, children, literally, what did you read and what did you say? What did you read and recite in your prayer, in the formal prayer? And they have never failed to mention Surah Al-Ikhlas. Short, simple. This surah is the equivalent in terms of spirituality to 1/3 of the Quran. And we have a couple of traditions about this surah. And some of the companions of the Prophet used to repeat the recitation of the surah in his prayer. And he was the imam of his community. The hadith of that the spiritual merit, the of this surah is the equivalent to 1/3 of the Quran. The first hadith here I'm mentioning that the Prophet ﷺ one day told his companions to gather, for he was going to recite 1/3 of the Quran. So they gathered, then like a congregation, if you will. So he left his room, which is adjacent to the mosque at the time. This is where he is buried, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he recited Qul Huwa Allahu Ahad, the Surah Al-Ikhlas. When they asked him, he said, it is the equivalent of 1/3 of the Quran. أما إنها تعدل ثلث القرآن. This is narrated by Imam Muslim, a sound tradition, of course. And another hadith narrated by Imam Muslim and Al-Bukhari. He asked, are you not able to recite in one night 1/3 of the Quran? And they said, meaning the companions, how do you recite 1/3 of the Quran? He said, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ تَعْدِلُ ثُلُثَ الْقُرْآنِ. So just recite this surah. It does not replace the recitation of the Quran. That's one thing, but this is something available, and we are encouraged to do. And we should not forget that if you recite it 3 times, that's the equivalent of reciting the Quran, literally, in terms of spirituality. The Abu Hurairah narrated the tradition that the Prophet ﷺ did hear a man reciting this surah, and the Prophet ﷺ commented by saying one word only, wajibat. There will be a question by Abu Hurairah about what wajibat, and we'll translate as much as possible. He said wajibat as a comment. Wajibat, I would translate it as granted. Simply, the Prophet ﷺ listened to someone reciting Surah Al-Ikhlas, and he said, granted. And of course, without any other explanation, Abu Hurairah asked the Prophet ﷺ, what was granted? What is granted? And the Prophet ﷺ said, paradise. Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted paradise to this man, to this companion, because he was reciting Surah Al-Ikhlas. And the Prophet ﷺ heard someone reciting this short surah, and the Prophet ﷺ commented by saying, هَذَا عَبْدٌ آمَنْ بِرَبِّهِ. This is a servant of God, this is a slave, a servant of God who believes, he who believed in his Lord, in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he did hear someone mentioning the surah within a context of a supplication, asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by the fact, Allahumma inni asaluka, God, our Lord, I ask you by the fact that I bear witness that you are Allah, there is no God but you, بأني أشهد أنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت الأحد الصمد. And these are from the Surah Al-Ikhlas, and it continues the rest of the surah, الذي لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. I ask you by the fact that I bear witness that you are Allah, and that there is no God except you, that you are Al-Ahad Al-Samad, the one, the self-subsisting, the self, in the sense of not in need of any. Of course, he does not need any of his creation, he created them. And then it mentions he who did not beget nor was begotten, did not have offspring, and he was not born, and no one is equivalent to him. No match to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no other gods. The Prophet ﷺ, once he heard this man making such a supplication, he said, by whose my soul is in his hand? By God. He asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with his greatest name, greatest attribute, with which if he is asked, he would respond positively, meaning والذي نفسي بيده لقد سأل الله باسمه الأعظم الذي إذا دعي به أجاب وإذا سئل به أعطى. And there are other verses. There are other traditions. Sorry. Both of the very last one is narrated by Abu Dawood, and even this one includes almost the same supplication, except that he does specify what he wants in the supplication. He said he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive him his sins, and then concludes by saying, you are the forgiving, the merciful. And the Prophet ﷺ commented by saying 3 times, قَدْ غَفَرَ لَهُ قَدْ غَفَرَ لَهُ قَدْ غَفَرَ لَهُ. Verily he had forgiven him, meaning forgiven him his sin or his sins 3 times. And I became aware of the following story many years ago. A man was sent by the Prophet ﷺ along with a group of his companions on a mission, and he led them in prayer, but he used to conclude with قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ in every single prayer. When they returned, they mentioned this to the Prophet ﷺ, and he asked him why he did this. So they asked him, and he said, because this is the attribute of Ar-Rahman, attribute of the merciful, the surah. فَأَنَا أُحِبْ أَنْ أَقْرَأ بِهَا. I love to read this surah because of that. And the Prophet ﷺ said, this is a hadith narrated by Bukhari and Muslim, he said, أخبروها أن الله يحبه. Tell him, inform him that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves him. And who doesn't want to be loved by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? It's an amazing opportunity, subhanallah. So start including the Surah Al-Ikhlas in your prayer. Start reciting Surah Al-Ikhlas very often. There are other things. For example, you'd include it in your recitation for protection. So you recite Al-Ikhlas along with the last 2 short chapters, Al-Falaq wa Nas. And he would wipe really he will blow into his hands after recitation, and he would wipe his face and head and whatever he could of his body before he goes to sleep. Again, Surah Al-Ikhlas, because of the Ikhlas in terms of sincerity, purity, in terms of belief. The surah itself, there is no one else except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Pure tawheed, sincere in the Tawheed, absolute monotheism. Because sometimes people say this religion is monotheistic. Okay, in terms of its origin, before suffering from the vagaries of transmission, before uh, all the theological constructs that were created and subscribed to later on, that I call these theological constructs post-revelational constructs. Imagine, just think about professors of theology. They have just finished their PhD. They got a job somewhere, and they want to, advance in their career and move from being assistant professor to associate, or from associate to full professor. And as theologians, they would problematize a theological issue that was not a problem until then, and they will publish about it. Rest assured, I have entered libraries in my life, specialized libraries about theology, not necessarily Islamic theology, and maybe tens of thousands of books on theology. And I'm sure, really, and the respective prophet, if he were to visit this library, that is really claims to develop and explain the theology that he has brought, he would not recognize these tens of thousands of books. It's very simple. In the Quran, the prophets called their own respective peoples to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. أَنُعْبُدُ اللَّهَ مَا لَكُمْ إِلَهًا غَيْرَهُ. A phrase that is practically repeated by almost every single prophet or messenger mentioned in the Quran, addressing his own people. How difficult is that? Because sometimes people get trapped, they might be tested, of course, they might be they might not see beyond the immediate, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted the specific prophet many signs, miracles, if you will, and people might think that the prophet is acting on his own. That's not the case. The flood of Prophet Noah, peace upon him, that was not the making of Prophet Noah, that was God. Prophet Moses splitting the sea, that was not Prophet Moses, that was God. And of course, Prophet Moses hit the sea with his staff, like before that, hitting the rock with his staff, and it will 12 springs of water would gush from the rock because of the 12 tribes. His staff becoming a serpent, swallowing the magic of the Egyptian magician's magic. He acted, but was not him. He was ordered to do that, but the miracle would not take place because of innate powers within Prophet Moses. The same thing, Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, did not perform the night journey. He did not on his own, because if you read that one verse in the Quran, in the surah named after the night journey, or the journey at night, if you will, Surah Al-Isra, it begins with praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who took his servant from Mecca to Jerusalem, literally from the noble sanctuary, from Masjid Haram to Masjid Al-Aqsa. From Mecca to Jerusalem. And then we have the ascension. Has nothing to do with the ability of the Prophet ﷺ. Absolutely not. Imam Sha'rawi rahimahullah said that if a man takes his child up to the top of the mountain, you don't commend the child for ending up on the top of the mountain. It's the father who took his son all the way up there. Same thing applies to Jesus Christ, peace upon him. He did perform miracles that the Quran mentions, many of them. people might have attributed special powers to Jesus Christ. It was by leave of God. فَبِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ in the Quran. By leave of God. A very beautiful surah indeed, but it calls for absolute oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, zero shirk, zero association. Do not associate anything or anyone with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is how we conclude the first part of Jawahir al-Quran. The next part, inshallah, will begin with the Durar. Until then, subhanakallah wa hamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.